Hello and a warm welcome to our Friday Power Platform Special Interest Group. Thanks for joining us today. We will cover a lot of interesting topics with the expert when it comes to Power Platform, Michelle van den Brink. With that said, I hand directly over to you, Michelle. What can we expect to hear from you today?
Thanks. And thank you for your wonderful introduction. Honored always to be called an expert. We will be taking a look today at all of the updates that Microsoft has announced and all of the things that they're going to roll out or have recently rolled out. Because there's a lot that has happened over the past half year, and there's a lot of things that are going to happen going into the new year and all the way up to spring, really. So I figured we'd highlight the best and the most of it. So these are all the things that will happen somewhere during the end of the year now or during the start of next year. If there's any questions about anything, we have a Q&A section here in the Teams window where you can ask questions. And Ruben and Ursula are keeping an eye on that while I talk away and show you all the great stuff. So I'll be covering the updates that have been already communicated, officially announced for the Wave updates, for example. So for Wave number 2 of 2021, there's 2 of those, of course. There's one specifically for the Dynamics applications, and there's one for the platform as a whole, more general. You have had, hopefully, ample opportunity to read these. If you haven't, do take a look at them because you'll find a nice summary of everything that has been rolled out and everything that's continuing to roll out. These are update waves, not just because they come in waves, but also because a wave is not a big bang. Something starts being rolled out and then it slowly rolls out over a period of time. So the wave number 2 typically starts in October and then it slowly rolls over into the new year and then it finishes around March, because then the first new wave starts for the next year. So there's a lot of functionality here that if you were to, I'll open this one here, for example, you'll find on the side, you'll see it is divided in all the different areas. So let's say you can go over to sales. We have the section here that summarizes everything, what is new and what's planned, and you'll see the green checkbox if it's already rolled out. But for example, here you see there's a lot of functionality also that's been announced as a part of this wave, but it's not here yet. It's coming. So these are all things that are coming in December. Here's a few things that are coming in January. This one even all the way in March, just in time for the next wave really to get started. So do take a look at all of these points here. We've highlighted the most exciting ones. Also, we'll be talking about a few updates that are not part of the wave, but of course, Microsoft continuously also improves other areas of the platform, and those will typically be announced separately in one of the many, many blogs. There's a blog for every individual product from Microsoft. These are the most important ones to keep an eye on when talking about the Power Platform. There's one for apps and one for Automate. And there's the dedicated one for Dynamics 365. And then there's also this specific article, which is the important changes article. And here you will find all the most important things, the breaking changes will be listed in here. I hope you are familiar with this article. If not, here it is in the slide. We will, of course, also share our slides so you can take a look at all of these links a little bit later. Let's start with that scary thing first, because there's a few deprecations which you hopefully are already ready for, familiar with, but let's take a look anyway. Form footers in the model-driven app experience are gone. They are already gone. Something you perhaps didn't notice, or perhaps you're still lucky and you are still on an environment that is on one update roll up ago, so you still have form headers, but they are gone or they will be removed as soon as Microsoft gets their hands on it. It's been a very traditional thing to have a header where you see the title, and then to the right-hand side, you probably see the status and the owner in a model-driven app experience. Then you have your form in the middle, your 3 columns, and then a footer line. But that footer line has been deprecated over the last year, and it is removed now, completely removed. So if we were to go into sales here, for example, if we were to open up a account record, you'll find that that footer line is completely gone now. Some of us have relied in implementations on the footer line to show some additional update, mostly tracking information, who modified the record, for example, as the button to show who was the last person to modify a record, who created it was retired long ago. Most of us moved that information into the footer, but as you can see now, there's no footer line here. So if you do have some information tucked away in there, it'll still be there in the editor for you, but you have to move it because it won't show up in the user interface anymore. So do take a look at that. For those of us who use it, the data export service is now officially deprecated. This was announced extraordinarily recent, only just last week, or this week even? No, this week even. And also its end of life has been announced. If you use it, if you're not familiar with it, this is a functionality that you can use to replicate your Dataverse into an Azure SQL instance. So you have essentially an exact copy of your Dataverse. That functionality is called the data export service, which will now be deprecated and retired. End of life is coming very soon, next year, November. So you have 1 whole year to migrate, which sounds like a lot of time, but as always, business takes priority. Do take a look at this if you're using it. It's important that you migrate away from things that will disappear. It's going to be replaced by a functionality called the Azure Synapse Link for Dataverse, which has been around for more than a year now, and that works just fine. It works a little bit different, where the data export service exports your Dataverse data into an Azure SQL instance or database. The Azure Synapse Link will write it to Azure Synapse, funnily enough, and not to Azure SQL. So if you do want it to end up in Azure SQL, you'll need to have a 2-step approach. First, you'll sync it to Azure Synapse, and then you need to install a separate synchronization process, sometimes called a pipeline, which will then synchronize the Synapse data into Azure SQL, which is all explained in this article also. There's a whole load of information on how to do the migration. There's a whole how-to guide on how to migrate. So no one should feel lost there. The OData v2 endpoint is also deprecated. It's been deprecated for a while, but do keep in mind that the removal is also coming up there. Also, about a year left on that. This has been replaced by the version 4 API many years ago. So if you're still on this 2.0 API, that would be very surprising to me. But I know that there will be integrations on there. According to Microsoft statistics, there are still customers on it because they do monitor that, of course. So here is that announcement for you. This concerns only this endpoint, the 2011 endpoint, which is the organization data service, not the classic organization service, the SOAP one. That one will still stay alive for a lot of backward compatibility reasons. And of course, OData v4, the version 4 endpoint, is not impacted at all because that's a nice modern API. Onto license news, which is always exciting. For the Power Platform specifically, Microsoft has announced a pay-as-you-go model. So you can now, rather than buying these licenses ahead of time, as is traditional, you buy licenses for your users, you assign them to users, and then they consume them. You can now do it the other way around. This is ideal for apps that have very infrequent usage, or something where it's very difficult for you to predict usage and who needs what and when and where. Can be enabled on individual apps. And essentially, this allows unlicensed users, so anyone who does not have a Power App subscription, to still open and consume Power Apps. Model-driven, Canvas, Portal, that doesn't matter, all the types of apps really. And you will simply get an invoice afterwards for what usage was consumed. So you do not have to purchase licenses ahead of time. You simply get billed for usage after the fact. This is based on Azure Pay-as-you-go, which you might be familiar with if you're already an Azure customer. This also runs completely on that engine, so it requires an Azure Pay-as-you-go subscription in the same tenant as your Office 365 or Microsoft 365 details. And then usage will be measured in there and also visible through the Azure subscription. There are 3 ways usage will be measured. The Power Apps per app meter will essentially measure how many users are using how many apps. And you can also see when they're using the apps. And you could already previously see where they were using the apps, in what region, for example. Any unlicensed user that uses an app will be measured, essentially, so you can get that invoice a little bit later for them using the app. If the same user launches the same app multiple times in a month, that only counts as 1 usage. But of course, if multiple people launch different apps, that will count as multiple usage. So any activated app will be billed against your Azure subscription. If someone opens the app and they already have an existing Power Apps license, those users will, of course, not be counted because you're already paying for their usage. So this is purely anyone who does not have a license and opens an app because they're so infrequently used, or that particular person may be infrequently using the specific app. As an example here, we have some calculations that we can take a look at. These prices are all based on the things Microsoft has shared with us. Your local pricing will differ, so please don't take these prices as gospel. This is all just things that Microsoft shared with us. These are the commercial prices. Your local prices will definitely be different. So in our first example here, we have 1 month in which 9 different users are using 3 different apps. Well, usage of apps and users is counted. So there's 9 users using 3 distinct apps. So that counts as 9 usages. So assuming a monthly rate of $10 here, that would cost $90 in the first month. Let's say in the second month, maybe that's the Christmas month, or any other month during the summer holiday, perhaps, where there's no usage. That month will be completely free of charge. You will not be invoiced for any usage because nobody used anything. Then in the third month, we have an example here of the same 2 users using those 3 apps also. Because it's the same users, you will be charged by user, but also because they're using separate apps, you will also be charged for the various apps. So user 1 here is opening app A, which will cost $10. But later they also open app B, that's a separate usage, so it will cost $20. And because we have these 2 users across 3 apps, that counts as 6 usages. So that's $60 for this month. There have also been some changes to the platform limits, which impact the usage, but also the billing. This is a quick reminder of what a platform request is and what it counts as. I hope you're familiar with that, but just in case, here it is. I'll skip over this and you can read it a little bit later, but it's also extensively written about in the documentation. You should be familiar with what this is by now. Here are the changes. Almost everything has gone up, except for one which has stayed the same. So previously, if you have a fully paid license, the most expensive license, a full Power Apps or a full Dynamics 365 license, you used to get either 10,000 or 20,000 requests per 24-hour window, depending on if you're Pro or Enterprise. Now it's just 40,000 across the board. Same for the lightweight users, for example, Power Apps per app, Microsoft 365 users with Power Platform usage, the team members, and also this pay-as-you-go model will count as a lightweight user. They are 6,000 where they were 5. For the dedicated running plans like Power Apps per Flow, virtual agents, and some add-on packs, it used to be either 100 or 150,000. Depends a little bit on which plan. Now it's just 250 across the board. For application users, it's increased to 500,000 requests per 24-hour window if you combine it with a existing Dynamics 365 license. If you combine it with a Power Apps or Power Automate license, it stays at 25,000. Capacity add-ons, which previously was a purchase to increase the limit by 10,000. The same add-on without price change will now increase it to 50,000 instead. So across the board, we all improve here, which is, well, not necessarily a first, but certainly a refreshing change. So this also impacts that pay-as-you-go, because in addition to those app usages, you will also be metered against your platform usage. So the Dataverse and the platform request usage. There is a base level that is included. So those are these levels essentially. And for pay-as-you-go, you will only be invoiced if you go over it. So most of the time, there's nothing to worry about unless someone's really heavy usage, has heavy usage. So let's say in the first month, we have user A here, and we also have a flow running in Power Automate. So there's a limit of 40,000 requests per day for this one, and for this one, it's 250 a day. Let's say they use nothing in the first month. Well, then you pay nothing. Let's say they use 10,000 here and 100,000 there. Well, that's still not that much, but because it's more than the allotted usage. So this is 10,000 over the 40,000. I should explain. This is not. So this is essentially 50,000, and this is essentially 100 more. So this is it's 350,000. So you only pay for the overage. So that's these two summed together. And as you can see, you pay fractions of cents for your overage. So for this month, we have $4.40 paid in overage. In the next month, we have a similar overage, not that much. So we only pay the $2. This is something for you to take a look at in detail, of course, as you try out this license scheme. On the page that describes this license scheme, all of these calculation examples are also there. And essentially, you will be able to see all of the usage in the Azure portal also. For AI Builder, Microsoft has also announced that there is now included a starter capacity for regular Power Apps licenses. Previously, when you buy a Power Apps license, it does not include AI Builder at all. It's always a separate add-on, but Microsoft has kind of had a change of heart there. Now with a regular Power Apps license, you get some AI Builder credits included. Not that much, but you do get some included. Depending on what level you step in, if it's a per app license, you get 250 credits. And if you have a per user license, the more expensive license, then you get 500 credits included to use/try out AI Builder. For credits, previously, there was always a process of you needing to assign the credits to a specific environment also. In December, although a specific date has not been announced, this process will also change. Any amount of credit you do not assign to any specific environment will simply be distributed across the environment. So as they are consumed, it doesn't really matter in which environment they are consumed. Essentially, they are just available on the tenant-wide level. Now, what was a credit again? Well, Microsoft continues to be nice and vague about what one credit exactly equals to, and that's because they've said that they're still trying to determine what the exact value of a credit is. So they want to be nice and vague about it. There is a calculator for it, though. You can use this to calculate how much you are expected to spend. So if we go over here to, let's say, the form processing, how many pages will you process per month? So you can say, well, let's say I need 10 per month, and then you calculate it, and then it'll tell you how many units you need. But here, a unit is 1,000,000 credits. So it's still unclear whether or not this is, well, is this 1,000,000 or is this less than 1,000,000? Because if I type in 1, that also calculates to 1 unit, which is 1,000,000. So it's kind of the game of where you have to increase this number until you kind of get to the point where it's 2 units. You see I can get relatively high here without actually rolling that over. Luckily, this whole game has been done for us. A wonderful MCT Plus MVP, Eric Suave, has done all of this maths for us. And in this wonderful blog article, he explains the reasoning and logic behind the calculation and what that would all equate to. So do give this a read as well. And there's even a handy table here of his conclusion of what everything then costs. This is, of course, just a moment in time snapshot. It's not to say that this is not going to change, but here you have some kind of grasp where you can have kind of a feel of what things cost. So if we have that form processing example I gave you earlier, so one scan of a form costs 625 credits out of the credits. So seeing as you only start with about 500 credits, that immediately puts you over your credit limit. Although he did test all of this with the big million credits, so perhaps there's a difference here with how that would be invoiced. And also this article is about a year old, so not necessarily up to date, but this gives you a feeling of how expensive things are compared to other things. Please don't take this as the one truth. This is his specific findings. Right. I have some updates about Dynamics 365 sales also. Before I do that, there is a question from Gavin in the chat that there were some announcements from Microsoft referring to the limits, also mentioning the 200 logins for portals. I did also read about that, although I haven't seen the official documentation being updated, so I haven't included it, but I did also hear that something is coming there. The portal logins are being increased, but I haven't seen it yet. Maybe it has been updated now, but I don't know for sure yet. For Dynamics 365 sales, we have a few functionality improvements. Worklists have been improved, and now the worklist will automatically be filtered and populated based on activity ownership rather than entity ownership. Previously, it was always focused on who is the owner of the record, much like that's how Dynamics 365 worked, really. You always see your records. But here, an activity can be owned by someone, but then the actual execution ownership is actually a different person, which is where that activity party system comes in. Now the work lists, which are available through the Sales Accelerator, will filter on the activity owner rather than the entity owner. So this allows people to focus a little bit faster on what they need to do without seeing the clutter of a task you've created but assigned to someone else later, for example. For customer service, we have a new and improved inbox view. And the inbox view sort of creates this Outlook-like experience inside of Dynamics 365. I'm sure you found this as well. In a customer service implementation, you connect at some point, of course, the Exchange service so that emails come in, but it's very difficult to unlearn a customer service agent to stop looking in Exchange or stop looking in Outlook because everything is now in Dynamics. But they're so familiar with the way Outlook works and the way emails come in and the way you can easily reply to an email. And none of that exists in Dynamics 365 really until here we have it. We have an inbox view now available specifically in the customer service workspace. There's a little inbox looking icon you can open, and then you can see all of the emails coming in just like you do in Outlook. And not just emails, all the other channels that you've connected via Omnichannel, for example. So any chat interactions you have included through the chat functionality or any kind of messaging system that you might have connected, text messages, all the various channels that you've connected can come through here, and you can see, answer, and reply to all of them while in the context of Dynamics 365, which keeps your work nicely focused. Also coming to the customer service workspace are IoT capabilities and the scheduling capabilities that we know more from the field service workloads, but they're essentially available for the whole customer service workload, which includes regular customer service. So now you can pop open the scheduling board, for example, to do some resource managing, to see and to make appointments and bookings. And also you can find all of the IoT functionality through the customer service workspace. where previously you'd have to go into the IoT hub, for example. You don't have to do that anymore. Now you can just open up an extra tab here to see all the alerts and to create maybe even a case through an alert. Also newly improved, finally a modern control for the subject dropdown. The subject dropdown on the case entity has been there since, I don't know, 2011. It hasn't really changed all that much. When we all moved to the unified interface, it got a kind of a refresher, but it's still the same control. Essentially, it just looks a little bit different. Now, finally, Microsoft has rewritten it completely. Now it's just a PCF. It's a custom control that Microsoft uses, and it is much more usable. There's a little search box on the top, just like you find in lookup fields, so you can look through the actual list. And there's a nice mechanism for you to open and close all of the things, just like you expected from the old one, essentially. So newly and improved. Of course, you can turn it on other entities as well, but it's turned on by default on the case entity only. Knowledge base has also been improved. There's a better experience now for adding attachments from various locations, so from the cloud or from the desktop. And when you're searching through the knowledge base, there's now included a small visual cue so that you can see whether or not you're looking at an article in Dynamics or outside of Dynamics, because in the last wave update, they've introduced the functionality so you can pull in knowledge articles that are outside of Dynamics and surface them as if they are in Dynamics. So you have a nice and cohesive unified knowledge base experience inside of the customer service module, for example. Service level agreements have also been improved. There's a recalculation functionality you can apply to your SLAs right now for case reactivation. Previously, when a specific KPI goes over its goes over time, you essentially fail that KPI. You fail to meet it, and then if the case gets closed at some point, nothing happens to your KPIs. Now you can choose to have your KPI essentially reactivated and recalculated. Especially handy, of course, when you close a case well within your limit. So let's say you have a response time or a solve time of 8 hours and you solve the case in 10 minutes, great. But what if the case gets reopened? Well, previously nothing happened, but now you have an opt-in feature to then restart the timer, deduct, of course, those initial 10 minutes that we already spent, and now you still have your 7 hours and 50 minutes remaining. It also applies to going past the deadline, including an option now to keep the timer counting after the deadline. Previously, the timer just stops on the deadline and it has an indication whether or not you succeeded or failed. Now, if you go over the deadline, it keeps counting, so you know how far you have gone over the deadline. In automatic routing, there is a preview functionality that you can try out today, which will ensure that, well, as it says here, the best and the most information is available to you when picking it up. Essentially, sentiment prediction has come in here, which we can already do through AI Builder, for example, but here it's completely integrated in the routing module for customer service. So you don't need anything else here, really. You can try it out to route, for example, angry tickets one way, while you route neutral or happy tickets one way. So an angry ticket can easily be escalated immediately to a manager or something like that, because you would want to help your angry customers in a nice and professional manner, of course. Also included, also a preview, is estimation effort, which is probably very good if it works. I've tried it out and it works to a certain extent, certainly. It's a preview functionality, of course, so I can't have a final judgment for you, but certainly very valuable when a case comes in and it's a certain question that the system is already very familiar with. It can estimate how much work that would cost for you to solve it, giving you a great mechanism to thoroughly schedule your customer service efforts, when they are required, who's required, and when can we solve things there, who has, as it says here, who has the bandwidth to manage this, because this might be a very complicated question with a very complicated answer, and not everyone has time for that. So a great way for you to get that estimation done ahead of time, so you know how to place it in your customer service team. Right. For Dynamics 365 field service, we also have a few updates. The one in the user interface starts, for example, by improving the asset tree, which is a combined location and asset tree, which is now a custom control, which you can use out of the box to look for assets under locations, for example. There's much like that subject control we saw earlier. Now it's a kind of a thing you can search through, you can expand and collapse things. So it's much easier for you to find things. Also included is now the ability to turn off the pricing engine for field service completely. There's a lot of setup involved for field service, especially if you have assets and products you're working with. You might have an incident type that requires certain materials, and then there's a lot of setting up to do with price lists and tags and what all of these materials are costing and what labor is costing. Oh, there's a toggle switch now for you to turn it off globally, so you don't have to worry about any of that, because perhaps you're using field service primarily just as a resourcing engine and not so much as an invoicing engine. You might have a different system for that. You might be using Business Central for that, for example, because you have all of your products and your prices in there. Totally valid. So now in field service, you can turn this off completely. So you don't have to worry about all of your pricing. You can just put your services in there and put your resources and the skills in there, and then let the invoicing be handled somewhere else. Also, a simplification is the work order form simplification option, which is unfortunately an opt-out. Everyone has been automatically opted in to this functionality, so you might find, or your users might find, that the work order screen looks a little bit different. This is especially striking if you use the default work order form rather than a custom one, for example, because a lot of things have disappeared. The ribbon, for example, has been simplified. A lot of lesser used items have disappeared, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were never used. Microsoft measures usage of all the things, of course, and a lot of unpopular items have been hidden by default now in the ribbon, which might frustrate your users a little bit because maybe they use this button all the time. They're just one of the few people who does. This luckily can be turned off. If you go into the general field service settings, there's a toggle setting there for you to turn off simplified work orders, and now you have everything back to normal. And then perhaps you can work together with your customer to create a separate form, which is already simplified. What's also included though is a better completion form. If you try to complete a work order which cannot be completed, there will now be an error message that includes why. And the times have been simplified a little bit, where we used to have the time from, for example, the time promises is now all converts into just a time window or a date window, where it's hopefully less confusing to people. And one thing to note, in the same update, location sharing is now turned on by default for everyone, especially in new organizations. This is one of those things that doesn't apply retroactively, but in any new organization, it's turned on. So you might want to keep an eye on that. If you don't want to use this, or probably more importantly, if your field service agents are not comfortable with this, just turn it off. A field service agent will, of course, always have that permission prompt on their phone, especially if they're using the field service app or the old Resco app on their phone. You will get a permission prompt from iOS or Android. They can always opt out there, of course, but if you don't need it, if you don't need to know where all your field service agents are at all times, you might as well turn this off in field service centrally, so you don't have to bother anyone with it. For the universal resource scheduling in general, there have been some improvements there as well. This applies to regular customer service as well as field service, as well as any custom process that you've built on top of your OS, because this is essentially a separate product also, but you can't buy it separately. You have to buy one of the qualifying products that includes it, but you could create a custom process on top of it. The new scheduling board that we've hopefully all experienced will now be the default for everyone. You can still switch back to the old one for a while, of course, but the new one will be default for everyone. And now resource groups are also one of those functionalities that will now be taken into account when you're looking for appropriate resources. And there is a new dedicated API action, a custom action that you can call to update people's work hours. Because previously that was an absolute nightmare in the API to do, really. The calendar entity, which is where all of that is stored, was a nested mess, essentially. Now there's a simple, well, there's 2 or 3 API calls here that will make it easier for you to update our resources working hours, either booking them to change the time, or you book some holiday time, for example. The model-driven app experience has also been refreshed. There's a few changes here, and this will impact all Dynamics 365 customer engagement apps, plus, of course, any custom model-driven app that you may have created. The nice functionality of the side panels has become available for all of us, where previously we saw that Microsoft was already using this in some areas, but now there's a client script action for us. We can call this now, we can open a side panel, and we can load that with, well, just about anything you would expect, really. You can load it with a form, a row, or well, a form row, obviously. You can load a app in there, so a Canvas app, for example, or you can load in some custom content, like a web resource or something like that. You can now also have multiple of these panels. You can see here there's 2 icons. These are essentially 2 small tabs, and you can even send notifications to the tabs, so you get a little notification indicator over there that something has updated on that tab, so someone can switch to it, so they always know what's going on, while, of course, staying in Dynamics 365 as a whole. Side panels will allow you to do more things at the same time. Otherwise, you'd have to open up a lot of new windows. Also introduced is bring your own data to the timeline. The Dynamics 365 timeline, which of course is just the Dataverse timeline now, that was already capable of showing all manner of activity elements in there, but it was always limited to just that, any kind of activity entity, really. And now you could theoretically show anything in there, even if it's not inside of Dynamics 365 or the Dataverse. You can define a data model that pulls information from another system or from various Dataverse tables, and then displays it in the timeline as if it is an activity. So giving you more flexibility there to integrate with maybe your phone system, that you can see all of the calls in the timeline automatically without actually making records inside of the Dataverse. You can surface all of that information automatically. And this is incidentally also the system, of course, Microsoft uses to surface the untracked emails inside of your timeline, which you can sometimes see. Relevant search, a functionality that has been in here for many, many years, has now been renamed to Dataverse Search. And also, for any new organization you create or any new environment you create, this is turned on by default now. Previously, it was always turned off by default. Now it's always turned on by default. Any existing organization should still turn it on, of course. The indexes can now also finally be managed through the modern solution experience. Previously, that was still something you have to go to the classic solution experience for. But now here, luckily, opening up a modern solution, there is a button here to manage search indexes, and that covers essentially the same functionality you are familiar with through the classic solution experience. You can turn the indexes on and off just like you did in the classic experience. Another improvement for the platform is in your model-driven apps, you can now expand and collapse various elements in the menu. The menu is always was always divided into groups already, but those groups didn't really do a lot, except for back in CRM 2011, really. Well, CRM 4 2011, let's say a long time ago, when you could expand and collapse them. That has been away for a long time. Now it's back. You can finally expand and collapse those things again. The browser will remember the expand and collapse state as well in a cookie. So if you come back to the same page a little bit later, it's still expanded or collapsed. This is something you need to opt in though, and that has to be done through a setting in the sitemap itself as a maker. So this is something that is not a user option. The maker has to opt into it. That's something you can only do through the modern sitemap experience, which is of course replacing the classic editor for model-driven apps. Take a quick peek at that here in our maker portal or in the Power Apps portal. If I go over to my apps, I have a whole lot of apps here. Let's say I want to turn this on for the Sales Hub. If I edit this, I have these options here. If I click edit, it will edit in the classic editor, but if I click edit in preview, it will open up the new editor. We've seen this in a previous special interest group session 2 months ago, I think, how to use this. This is the new experience for creating model-driven apps, and this will replace the old experience. But essentially, you'll want to go in here also to modify the sitemap, which is over here. And then when we click on the navigation bar here, here is that option to change this collapsible menus, and you can already see a preview here, which is also a great change in contrast to the old editor. You can really see what you're doing, but now you can. So you can see that this enables this expand and collapse functionality, for example, which is, I like it. It keeps things neat. There's always so many things in the menu. Half of it I don't even use, but now I can just hide it because I don't need it. Also bravely announced is Microsoft announced that they will have full feature parity in the modern solution experience coming in January 2022. This makes the entire classic solution experience deprecated as of January 2022, which is a good announcement because the classic solution experience was, it is very slow. And the modern one is much faster, much cleaner, much more user-friendly. I don't want to say that I don't believe it, but I really want to believe it. But let's see. This is one of those announcements where it's very brave that they managed to announce it. I hope this is not some marketing announcement rather than, I hope the product team agrees with this announcement. Let's see. In January 2022, I look forward to working only in the modern solution experience. When we work in it today, there are still some areas, of course, where, well, the switch to classic button is there for a reason. Some functionality is not supported in this modern experience yet. It's coming. The day that we can use the modern solution explorer only is coming, and it's coming relatively soon. So let's get ready for that. The announcement is here, just in case you want to read it. Also available now, thanks to the updates from Wave 2, is the advanced lookup capability, which was severely lacking in the new unified experience. This is something that we've had in CRM since 2011, and now luckily through this update it's available again in all Dynamics apps plus in the model-driven app experience for Power Apps as well, of course, where if you have a lookup, you can now drill down into it more to show more records in a pop-up, so you can search through all of the records, you can switch views, and you can select multiple records if that allows it, all without losing the context, losing where you are. Plus, you can have more columns. Because of course, previously in your lookup, you can only see a limited amount of columns, but in your lookup view, you can add as many columns as you need. So here we have it. In our platform here, let's see. Let me open up a lookup here. So if I look this up, I can look up, of course, what we already know. I can look up this previously. There will always be 2 columns here, plus you have the ability to add a few more columns up to 5, I think, but usually 3 is already a lot. But now if you need more, there's this advanced lookup, which opens up a pop-up essentially, which shows you all of those records here, and even includes a search thing, and now I have all the columns that I need here, plus the availability to only see my stuff, the availability to switch to a different view, should that be allowed, of course, and that has to be reconfigured to be allowed, etc. All the things we were used to in the old experience, really, in the classic experience. So I can just simply check one of these and click done, just like this, in a multi-lookup scenario. So where I can select multiple records, essentially. Oh, I should not have saved this, because this is going to take forever. In a multi-lookup experience, you have that same experience that you had before. You can select multiple records, so multiple records will show up then, and you can click on done to add them all at the same time. It's primarily relevant, of course, in the activities, for example, where you can add multiple people to an activity. Also introduced, although not visible to you in the user interface, is custom multi-table lookups. Previously, we create lookups, but we can only select one target table, which is unfair because Microsoft has this secret ability to create lookups which have multiple target tables. Well, now we can luckily do that too. Microsoft has opened this up for us, although there's no screen in the UI for this just yet. There is an API call to create those. So luckily, the good community has come together, and there is a tool called the Polymorphic Lookup Manager in the XRM Toolbox, which I recommend to try out. That's an easy way for you to manage them. It's called Polymorphic Lookup because that's technically what it's called. But of course, in simple Power Platform terms, they refer to it as a multi-table lookup, which is still exciting nonetheless. Things you hopefully already have seen. A model-driven app experience has been refreshed somewhat. You have a different drop-down for the views. These buttons have changed a little bit, and there's a new grid experience, new bulk experience as well through the grid, where now it opens in a side panel rather than that old CRM 2011 pop-up, which gives us much more functionality essentially, because now it just uses the unified interface form to render this. What you may have also seen is a new button that appeared next to the funnel icon, which was always a filtering mechanism. And now you can also determine what columns you want to see in your view. So you can ad hoc change the definition of the view. If you are missing a column or you want to order them, you can change that now as well, and even save that as a personal view, which you couldn't previously do. So with this, in total, that essentially replaces the functionality for advanced finds. So that will be less required now. The only functionality from advanced find still missing is exported to fetch XML queries, but I'm sure that will get its own home at some point. But here we essentially have the moment where most users will no longer need advanced find, because now you can do both. You can edit the query and you can edit the columns here. The security model is getting a historic change, I would say, because the last time the security model has been changed is so long ago, I don't even remember it. Business units have always been a very rigid process of managing and dividing an organization, where all of the records owned by a user in a business unit, all of those records also belong to that business unit, which doesn't have the amount of flexibility that you might need in an organization. So now Microsoft is making it possible for a record to be owned by a business unit, even if it's owned by a user that works in a different business unit. There was always a field already for this. There's a field owner for the user, and there's a field called owning business unit, where you can already see who or which business unit owns the record. That is now also an editable field, so you can change that. Also, a user can now live in multiple business units with different roles, being a manager in one business unit and perhaps a regular salesperson in another business unit. This is still a preview, so try it out, but please don't be surprised if it breaks something that you're used to. So try it out in a sandbox. A quick Update about portal apps. Portal apps were always the odd one out because you cannot include portal components in your solutions. Well, rather than me introducing you that that's now possible, actually a separate announcement. The Power Platform has a command line interface, which is a package that you can run in the Windows console, and that has been extended so you can now perform some portal actions. You can import and export portals, or rather, you can download the portal and upload the portals. You can upload a portal as a deployment profile, which is essentially a YAML file that contains all of the necessary configuration and the snippets and stuff to get your portal running. So you can now essentially create portal templates of your own and easily deploy them to your customers. So you have this one template file, or well, deployment profile file, and you can use the command line interface for the Power Platform now to upload that to a customer tenant, and that will effectively roll out a portal for you. This is also included in GitHub Actions, but that's just because that runs essentially on that command line interface in the background. Also introduced is the Portal Web API. Now, previously, when using client script in the portal, you couldn't really interact with the Dataverse directly, like you can do, for example, in model-driven experience. But that has changed now. That has been introduced. You can now get records from the Dataverse in the client for the portal experience as well. So you can at least query and read information there, which previously you could also do through the OData API, which was a total mess. So it's not surprising that that is going to be replaced by this. Also announced is code components, or PCFs, are now available in portals as well. So now finally you have a component that you can build, which runs in Canvas, Model, and Portal apps. So that custom component that you've been dreaming of, it's finally the time to create that or have someone create that, and you can use it everywhere. There's a little bit of a process there, though. You need to load it into the system first and then activate it in the model-driven experience first. That's mostly because the portal experience relies heavily on the model-driven experience. Also, some changes in the AI build. We've been talking about that license change already, but there's also a small change in the models. You can now bring your own models. Models you've already created in Azure, for example. AI Builder, of course, relies on Azure, and all of those services we use inside of AI Builder are essentially wrapped Azure services. So it's not surprising that if you are already using those Azure services on your own, you can bring them in. There's a functionality you can use to register the existing models that you already know from the Azure cloud, but also from other clouds. Not necessarily all of them, but certainly a lot of them. You can register those now in AI Builder, and you can consume them through all of our favorite experiences, of course, Power Apps, Power Automate, and you can also do that in the Dataverse. Also improved is the small thing that we have here. We have controls in Power Apps, of course, but we can also now call some of our favorite models through PowerFX, which is, of course, the query language that we have, or the formula language, I should say, in Power Apps, which I can show you in this editor. In the Canvas editor, if we go to our data sources and we add some data here, now, in addition to our tables, which always sit at the top, we have a separate section for our AI models, which we can see here. So let's say there's a lot of models, of course, both trained and untrained. So let's say we have sentiment analysis. You can add that, and then you can just call it with a PowerFX call. So if I add a button here, I can use the sentiment analysis, which has a function called predict, and I can say, this is great, which is, oh, sorry, that's the other way around, of course, the language first. So English, this is great. And then that has, oh, come on, as a result. And let's put that result in a variable. So set comment result this, and we can show that in a label. Sentiment results is not the best example, of course, but there you have it. Oh, that's missing sentiment. Not sentiment. There we go. So let's see, is that great or is that not so great? The thing is it's not working. Probably because my subscription. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I forgot to activate the AI builder, so it's still dormant in this tenant. But that's essentially how you would now be able to do it, rather than previously you'd always have to create a flow in Power Automate and then call the AI builder through there, or use one of the objects available here. But for example, sentiment analysis is not in here because that's not really an interactive thing. Like a business card reader is interactive. But now you have all of these models available here through the data tab, so you can just call them as a function. Well, that brings us essentially to the end with some minutes to spare, and not too much, but minutes to spare for questions. If I go over to the Q&A, I do not see any additional questions that have popped in now. If you do have them still, do leave them. And if not, thank you all so very much for listening. We will share this recording with you, of course, as well as the slides. And I would say, enjoy your weekend.
Many thanks to you, Michelle. Great presentation. And as Michelle stated, there will be a sending out of the recording and presentation by next week. If you have any questions, you know where to find us. Just drop us some lines. For now, thanks again for joining, and we wish you all a very nice weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.